Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of What's Going On in Canadian Tech Market Podcast. I'm your host, AB. I help companies in Vancouver, as well as in British Columbia, as well as in Manitoba, hiring great tech marketing and cybersecurity professionals. And today I'm delighted to be joined with Michael Thu, who's a director of engineering at Mogul. Michael, I'll just give you the floor to introduce yourself and what you do and how's things.
Yeah, thanks for having me on the podcast, by the way. And yeah, I'm kind of
Pleasure.
excited to chat about a lot of things, and we share some similar experience in our past, so it's kind of cool. So yeah, I've been an engineer for probably the last 16 years or so, and I've been working in various different kinds of industries. I think I started in like a big, more of a big corporate type environment, and I got into mobile apps for a long time, and most recently I've been doing a lot more work on the Web3 front and more AI blockchain type work. So yeah, it's
Mhm.
I've been kind of all over the place, and I think the thing that I share with you a little bit is I worked in Japan 2 years when you were there, so
Yeah,
we have
yeah,
some interesting overlap. But yeah,
exactly.
I think that's so far it's been an interesting journey, but I
Mhm.
think so far, I mean, the last 16 years I think it's totally worth it, just being in tech. So yeah.
Amazing, amazing, Michael. So, Michael, actually, one of the reasons why I invited you to the podcast is because you mentioned that you came to Canada as an international student, right? And then 20 years passed. So, I believe you did your college here, or what kind of studies did you do here?
Yeah, it was just for it was not so much an international student. I
Hmm.
actually did most of my schooling in Singapore, and then I came here
Okay,
primarily at the end of probably grade 12 or so, and I got my
okay,
permanent residency here, and I went to university here, and I started my career
wow,
here. So yeah, that was about
okay.
20 years ago. So it's one of those things where I came to go to school, and then I've been here ever since. So yeah, kind of
Right.
like it here. Yeah.
Got it, totally. So yeah, I mean, a lot of people like stay they come here as international students, as in go to the
Hmm.
universities like in UBC, Salmon Fraser,
Yep.
BCIT, KPU, so many cool universities out there. So tell me more, like, so how you started your journey as an international student, or let's assume like let's consider that as an
Yeah. Yeah.
international undergrad student, and then from here. So how was the journey? How did 16 years pass?
Well, I think the journey, and I mean, to say the very least, it's unexpected at some points, right? I mean, I actually didn't start in computer science to begin with. When I started my school, I was thinking about lots of other things. Like I wanted to be, go to like a traditional engineering just field. That's basically my idea. And then I actually made an attempt to go to law school. Try to do my LSAT, and then I eventually settled on computer science as like something that I wanted to be doing. And I think it's one of those things where, I started getting to it. I started doing the projects at school, and I just really enjoyed the coding and, building of products. And coincidentally, around that time, I started like working with, I think I got a couple co-op jobs here and there, right? So I think that's probably one of the key things. Like once you, getting a little bit deeper into the education of, especially for software, right? Software engineering, getting your feet wet, like either, building projects with friends or getting into a co-op kind of situation, because then you kind of know how the industry works, right? And a lot of times, like at least in my example, just from that, right, I got into the industry and I enjoyed what the industry is doing.
Mhm.
So I just went on it ever since, and there's a little bit of a entrepreneur type thing for me. And around the time that I was really getting into the industry, I got into the mobile apps world. So, like, I think it was around when iPhones were first coming out, right? And I was like, everybody's building apps, like a bit of a gold rush. So I got into that. And I think ever since then, just the ability to build software that people can use just kept me in it. So yeah, I
Okay.
think, students and anyone right now, it's even easier, I think,
Mhm,
to
mhm.
at least get started. I think back in my days, like I think the iPhones were probably, outside of building web apps, right, the iPhones were one of the first, more user centric ways to build applications that you can see.
Right.
So yeah,
Like
yeah, I think,
iPhone were
yeah.
back then, I think more like an alien product. I mean, I couldn't even imagine, 20 years ago. My dad was using an iPhone 2G and I was like, what is that? And what kind of software was inside? Like it was a very, I think, very high level for me that time. So just to go in deep, Mike, anyways. So you
Sure,
mentioned
sure.
that you started as a software developer, but then you moved in areas like printing, like 3D, blockchain. What gave you the quest to discover so much in such a short span of time?
Hmm. I think a big part of me is just, I mean, maybe it's a little bit of a ADHD in working, but it's
Hmm.
it's really the new tech, right? I think the whole reason why I'm in this industry is just, the ability to build things, right? Build things that like ability to translate some vision in your head into some kind of software that can be used by people. So I think, when I first started my job, I worked at Kodak for a while, and I think we were doing a lot of support for servers and things like that. There's a lot of enterprise software, and I thought that was kind of cool. But like I said, when the iPhones and stuff came out, right? It's then suddenly it's like, okay, now I can build some software that suddenly I can see someone on the train using that I built, right? So I think it just kind of escalated from there, right? So and as new technologies come out, right, I usually do a lot of experimenting and coding on my own time. I still do. And when you get to a point where you're comfortable with it and you know the community of people that work on it, you just kind of naturally get into there, so
Right.
concrete examples of things like this is, when I first started working on iPhone apps, right, I went to a lot of hackathons, and I did a lot of like projects with people that I meet there. And I think that's kind of opened a lot of doors for working in the mobile apps world. So, same for, when I worked at Weave for, we were doing 3D printing for insoles, right? So it was just, through the connections and through,
Okay.
trying to get embedded myself into the industry and people. So yeah, I think that's
Okay.
that's kind of the whole like overall description of my journey.
Sure. So I think one takeaway from this is joining for students, especially international students, like going to a lot of hackathons, a lot of networking events, a lot of meetups, so that they can also find like-minded people, like-minded team members to do something together. Awesome. So moving on, like Web3, you mentioned about Web3, Web3, Web3. What is Web3?
Well, it's a little bit of a buzzword, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, currently one of the things that I do is I'm a co-founder for this company called Testnet Labs, and we do a lot of support for companies that want to build Web3 applications. I mean, at
Mm-hmm.
the heart of it, basically is the application on the blockchain, right? So everything from cryptocurrency type applications, like I mean, right now it's not really so hot, but a while ago, crypto
Yeah.
or like NFT space, so things like that. So there's all these there's all these things that everybody knows that is a bit of hype topics, right? Like NFTs, crypto. But there's a lot of other applications. Like for instance, I'm working with a company called Open Ads Protocol, right? And they were building a like advertising platform, like a Google Ads thing, but for Web3 games, for digital like blockchain products, right? So it's essentially I guess a decentralized way of doing software. So instead of
Okay.
having like big centralized entities like Facebook, Google owning a lot of infrastructure and software, this is like a way for software to exist without someone actually having to own it, and having a bit more of a decentralized way where people can just come together and do something, and they can decide what's going to happen. So yeah, I think it's a too big of a topic like what is Web3,
Okay.
but in essence it is apps on the blockchain, decentralization. That's kind of what
Okay.
we aim for. And I mean, I guess, okay, maybe to step back a bit, one way that you can look at it is you know like, why is it even called Web3, right? So Web2, as you call it, Web2 is what we have. We have a
Okay.
lot of platforms like Facebook, we have web apps like social media, things like that. We can call it Web2, right? You log
Yeah.
in, you have platforms run by a handful of companies, right? Web3 is essentially breaking that all down into platforms that are run by you know basically no one, right? There's no I guess lesser like lack of, I mean, so it's not it's moving away from information being controlled by a group of people to information being like more freely available. So decentralized web is what we would call like a Web3 thing. Yeah, but
Got it.
it's still very buzzwordy, but I think Web3 itself is trying to find its own identity still.
Mm.
Yeah.
I think it's a bit clear now, especially like Bitcoins or, like those cryptocurrencies. Those are all Web3 products or the innovation or the kind of the output of Web3, right? If I'm not wrong.
Yeah. Like Bitcoin is a good example, right? It's I would say that's the grandfather of Web3, where
Hmm.
it's a decentralized currency, right? So
Right.
anyone can have Bitcoin, anyone can spend Bitcoin. You don't need access to a bank to be able to use it or transact with it.
Hmm.
So if you think of that analogy, it's basically moving from, like a central bank controlling all your money to now you have control over your money, right? You can keep
Hmm.
it where you want, you can spend it how you want. So that's what the evolution of the internet, I think, is, right?
All right.
So yeah, it's kind of cool. Yeah.
Certainly. So yeah, I mean, I'm very curious about one of my personal like purpose of doing this podcast is
Hmm.
actually cyber threat, cyber security, and
Hmm.
awareing our users or our listeners about cyber security. So how do you protect, you know, this Web3 products from cyber threat, cyber security?
Well, I think in Web3, right, you can think of security in like in a couple of layers, right? And I mean, as much as the appeal of Web3 is being decentralized and having ownership of your own things that you own, like for example, let's say Bitcoin, you own your own Bitcoin, right? But you do get the security of like, the bank is not going to suddenly disappear on you one day and your money disappear. But at the same time, how you protect that money is for you, right? So so security in Web3 and crypto, it's actually a big deal, right? Because I mean, you can have all the high tech securities. Like I mean, people that I work with, we always talk about not having your cryptocurrency, for example, on an exchange that you don't know anything about that's owned by someone else, right? Or if you're building applications, right, always think security first, right? Like if you're building a smart contract, like you have to make sure what kind of vulnerabilities exist, do some audits, right? So I think even in cybersecurity world, right, if you're building a Web3, a blockchain application, I think you really have to think security first more than usual. Right? I mean, currently I work in a
Right.
fintech, and that's security is a big thing too, right? And I think most of the time, especially if you're starting out as an engineer, right, you're more focused on making things work, right, making shipping software. But I think as we move towards more decentralized models, like software being easy to build, security is a big deal. And we're not talking just about like actual like infosec type tools, right? We're talking about like OPSEC kind of security as well, especially like someone, how do you prevent someone saying like, oh, like, we have access to your Bitcoin key and log in here type attacks, right? So yeah, maybe that's too generalized, but I would say, yeah, I mean, security in Web3 is probably the most important thing for anybody doing anything serious,
Yeah.
right? And I mean, and because there is no centralized entity to protect you, is even more of a focus. Right now, if someone steals your money, you can maybe go to your bank and say, hey, like I want to dispute, right? If someone steals your Bitcoin from your wallet.
Hey guys, thank you for tuning in to What's Going On in Canadian Tech Market Podcast. I'm your host, AB Siddiqui, and I help companies in British Columbia as well as Manitoba finding great tech and marketing flexible resources. What I mean by flexible resources is you have a great team already of your marketing and tech talent, but you want to deliver something, some project, some product faster, more efficiently, and you can't hire or you don't want to hire someone full time. Then my flexible resources come in and help you build that project, build that product within 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months, whatever you want, whatever you need, and then they move to the next project. So if you're looking for a flexible or even a fractional resource, someone who can come over for a few times a week, call me in today. My number is 604-259-2500.
You don't know who this person is, right? It's gone.
Mhm.
So yeah, I mean, yeah, always think security first, right? I mean, there's lots of tools. Like if you're building smart contract applications, there's companies that will audit it for you, right? Like Certic, one of them, right? There's companies like Open Zeppelin that will audit this kind of contract. So yeah, like my recommendation, anybody listening to this is just if you're building smart contract type apps, make sure it's secure, right? Don't build everything yourself. Get things audited if you have money. If you're deploying it somewhere out to the internet, make sure everything is secure. Like
Yeah.
don't give security, don't make security an afterthought.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what we need to know. Like, I mean, I think everyone right now like should be really aware, especially from an entrepreneur's perspective as well as a user perspective,
Yeah.
that how important is to kind of protect our data or be secured. Because I personally think that there will be a day coming where there will be cyber police. There will be like
Cyber police. Okay.
there will be like cyber justice. Of course, there are cyber crimes, cyber tribunals already,
Mm-hmm.
but there should be more and more emphasizing on that cyber crime areas. But anyways, moving on to a little bit of lighter topics about personal ones, I want to know
Yep.
more about your experience in Japan. Like just like
Mm.
me, like you moved to Tokyo and then Vancouver. So what made you move to Japan and then coming back again to Canada?
Well, it's actually not that interesting of a story, to be honest, right? Basically, one day I get a message on LinkedIn, right? I forgot what it was. It was a company from Singapore that was doing. I didn't know they were a company from Singapore, right? They were talking about, oh, we have an engineering manager job, like for like a marketplace type product, and marketplaces is something that I actually really like working in, like big scale marketplaces. So I start talking to them. And then, after the initial chat, I realized that, oh, wait a minute, this is in Japan. So I thought like, oh, maybe it's a remote job, but ends up, no, it's a, relocation type job. And, after some discussion with my wife, right, we thought like, like we don't have too much, I guess tying us down in Canada here in Vancouver. So I thought, why not? I'd try it, and yeah, it was a little bit of a process, like getting everything wrapped up here, moving, and I think I always remember like it's a different energy starting your first day of work in a different country, like all the jobs that I had. But overall, it was an awesome experience. I love all the team and all the people that I work with at Macari. I would do it again, right, if I could.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I mean, there's still a lot of gotchas, right? Like being in a new country, you really need to have a plan of what you want to do there long term. But yeah, I mean, maybe it's similar to your journey, maybe not. But yeah, I did come back and eventually, because one of the things that I wish I had done differently is have a plan for, like both me and my wife there, right? Like we were not 100% clear on like where our careers go. Like, I mean, because we relocated essentially because of my work, right? So yeah, I think anybody considering doing that, I mean, I'm all for it. Like just do it, but have a plan, right? Have a plan of how long you want to be there, and and like what you want to do next, and then you'll be set. So yeah, and also I think a big part of the factor is I moved there in late 2019, and that's when COVID started, right? So, essentially for the whole time there, I didn't really come back to see my family or anything. And, that was a little bit hard, right? So,
I see.
like I think that was probably a huge contributor here. Yeah.
Yeah, I think family plays a very important role, and especially when
Mm-hmm.
you have your own family, you have your partner. Then yeah, in Japan, like I had an amazing experience, and I also worked with Mercury, like as a recruiter, of course,
Yeah,
supporting them
cool.
in their searches. I mean, very close connection with a lot of Mercury engineers and managers still. But again, like to add up your point, like yeah, some factors, especially in a country where the language is completely different from what you or we speak primarily, could be challenging for not for maybe us perhaps, but maybe our partners or family members. So yeah, definitely having those kind of moves requires a lot of planning. I totally agree.
Yes, yeah. I think Macari is a really good one though. Like I think for me, at least experience wise, because the
Mhm.
relocation experience was amazing,
Yeah.
right? And it really took out a lot of the stress of having to be in a new country. Because when I came to
Sure.
Canada from Singapore, it was a different thing, right? It was by
Yeah.
myself. So it was, like we'll figure stuff out, like, even everything from, how do you get a phone plan to,
Mhm.
how do you open a bank
Yeah.
account? Yeah. But so yeah, definitely like if you have company relocation support, it makes your life like 100 times easier.
Definitely, definitely. And I think similar to you, I also changed countries 3 times. I was in Bangladesh, then I went to Japan, and then to Canada. And maybe you were from Myanmar, then
Yeah.
Singapore, then Canada, right? And then Japan. Oh my God, you have more. I mean, that's crazy. That's incredible. That's great.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it definitely gives you a perspective, right? And I
Yeah.
always feel like living somewhere for a while, even for short periods of time, right? It's
Mhm.
a different way to, really learn about how the work culture, everything, right?
Yeah,
Like just the culture in general than just visiting. So yeah.
certainly. Can you tell us more one cultural difference between Japan and Canada in terms of working in tech?
I didn't really feel it that much, right? I think Mercari is like felt very much like any startup that I worked here. So yeah, it was not so different. I think maybe at times there's a little bit of a language barrier with some teams, right? Maybe, right? I mean, I think one difference though is I think people do things after work a lot more in Japan. That's what I
Uh-huh.
found, right? Like, I mean, my
Certainly
team,
true.
like, with my managers, like everyone, right? I mean, not so much when COVID started, of course, but like in the beginning for the first few months,
Mhm.
I, it was really nice. Like, it's like, you get to know people a lot more. You go out drinking, right? All this stuff, and
Yeah.
I feel like I didn't have that much. That like a lot of places I work here are very social too, but I found the
The
level of
nomikai
social in
culture,
Japan.
right?
Yeah, the Nomikai
Remember the word
culture, and
nomikai,
then the Nomikai, the second
Gohankai.
Nomikai.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I kind of miss
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's an amazing country to be actually, if you again have the purpose and the, the plan. So yeah,
Yes.
moving on, Mike. So I think throughout your career with so many interesting experience, like if you were to go back to one job, which job that would be?
Uh, yeah, I think it's probably not like a job, let's say, right? But I was a
Or
founder
a
for
role?
a crypto exchange, right? Like P2P
Uh,
Moon. I founded this pretty much when I left my job in Japan and I came back. And it was probably the first successful startup that I had. So it was co-founded. There was a friend of mine that also co-founded together with me, right? And we actually got to like a decent amount of users, right? And we actually we didn't really go down, we didn't really continue it, just more for we were not sure what we should do with regulations that are coming out for crypto at that time. But yeah, it was like a really fun experience of taking something from 0 to 1, right? From
okay.
like an idea that you have with a friend when you're having a beer to like, okay, let's build this, and then suddenly having users like use your product. And that was a different animal. So I think that's why, like, say currently, right, with Testnet Labs, with open as protocol that I'm working with, right, I'm trying my best to, kind of replicate this experience of starting something, from scratch. So yeah, I think I
Mhm.
mean, I definitely say, like, everybody should just try to start something on their own, at least once in their
Sure.
life, see how it is.
Certainly,
Yeah.
certainly. I also tried to start out when I was right after my college and back in 2018. I was even talking today morning with one of my friends. Like, it was pretty hard because I eventually failed and lost a lot of money, and then had to pay back some of the money to the investor. There was a lot of issues, but again, like it's great to start, but also if you should have a kind of plan B as well. If you fail or
Hmm.
if you can't scale, how would you exit? So definitely.
Exactly,
Wh-
yeah. I have a lot of respect for companies that have been around for a long time, and as much as, like, sometimes, my personal like, I guess, desire to like do different things, right? Sometimes when you join a startup and someone's made it work, right, to the
yeah,
point where they can hire you and they've been around for a long time, like it's like huge respect for me, right? Because I kind of 99% of startups fail. It's
true.
just the reality of it. So yeah, like, making it work, it's a whole
Right.
different form of I guess, validation.
Game
Yeah.
ball. Certainly, and especially in countries like Canada or Japan or the US, where the startup cost is so high, and then the people cost is so high, tax is so high. So especially on those countries, like especially think of Mercury, how big is it, right? Like the way
Yeah,
they're scaling, expanding, and they pay well as well. I mean, it's definitely a lot of respect to those founders.
exactly.
So
Yeah.
as a senior tech professional, if there was there any technical mistake you have done or anything in general that you don't want our listeners to repeat or to do?
Well, I think over like 16 something years of my life, I think, that's probably more mistakes than I can remember, I think. But I think in terms of classification, I think the things that always get me in trouble, it's a lot of times it's just, working on things by myself, in a silo, right? Even if you're working in a company, right? Even when I was like running my startup, for example, right? There's really no problem out there that is so unique that no one can help you, kind of thing. So I mean, I like, there are so many like specific examples for me, but it's always since the beginning of my career. You're like trying to, let's say you're trying to build a specific view in a mobile app or something, right? And you're getting stuck on like how to build certain tables or something, and you spent days working on it. You don't really ask for help or anything, and then maybe like a week later you find that whatever other team that you need to interface with have changed what they've done. So, and then suddenly you have to scrap everything anyway. So yeah, so yeah, I mean, your team exists to collaborate, right, to work with you. So I think all my mistakes that I've ever done is basically just having, like, I don't know, maybe it's because I thought that it would be, I'm too embarrassed to ask for help or something like that, right? Because
Okay.
people think that I don't know what I'm doing. But yeah, in all these situations, if I just asked for help earlier, it would have been
Mhm.
resolved. And and everyone wants to help you anyway. So yeah, like,
Exactly.
anybody new, like, just the team is there to help. So just don't work on your own for too long. If you're stuck, it'll be worse for you in the long run.
True. I think Steve Jobs always said, right? Like fail fast and fail forward. So
Exactly.
I think
Yeah.
it's so essential to kind of fail and to accept, I mean, lowering down your ego and, just accept it and move on and ask for help. Totally.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great. So
Exactly. Yeah.
speaking about management style, right? So you mentioned that even though you were managing teams or having your own teams, but you
Mhm.
were still trying to do stuffs. So how's your management looks like? Like, what's your management style?
Yeah, I talk about this a lot. I mean, recently just in like various management roles that I've had. Like I think a lot of my management style can be probably summed up with just being very collaborative and very outcome focused. So I'm not so much about like output, like so I'm not so concerned with my teams like the bum in seats, like work how many hours type things, but what are we actually achieving? Right. And the
Mhm.
outcome that I always look for my teams to kind of assess, like, are we in a healthy state, is, are the teams able to innovate?
Right.
And you don't really get to that innovation stage unless, you're not fighting fires and you're comfortable with the current work. And then now you can like actually do innovation work. So yeah. So, I try to foster a culture of like, collaboration, like, not have a very strong, like kind of what I call like a blameless culture, right?
Mhm.
And just everyone really focus on the outcomes of what we want. Yeah.
And what kind of people do you personally like to hire in your team?
Yeah, I think it's the same kind of people that fits into that framework that I just mentioned, right? Like, so, people that I would consider highly collaborative people,
Mhm.
and when I do interviews and stuff, I'm really, really looking for examples of, even specifics. Like, I look for, people that talk about in the we sense, right? Like, we do this, we do that. And, when I ask about, like, I mean, I think every manager does, right? Ask about like what's a hard problem that you've kind of been through type thing, right? I'm looking for something that maybe you failed and it's okay, right? But how did you get back up, and how did you get back up with your team? How did you collaborate with your team to fix this, like make sure it doesn't happen again? So yeah, I think that's the key thing for me, is look for really collaborative individuals that know how to work with others, right? Know how to know that making mistakes and learning from them is an important thing. So yeah, like just
See.
examples of collaboration, yeah, for me.
Awesome, awesome. So speaking about being a leader, right? So you deal with so many people, and sometimes days are not always great, right? Sometimes it might be dull, sometimes you might be sick, weak, family problems, so many issues comes up. So how do you tackle with your own mental health and support your team members with their, being an empathetic leader or their mental health or overall, like, apart from reaching their goals or their outcomes you mentioned? Outcomes, or what was
Outcomes,
that? Outcome, but
outcomes,
from
yeah, just focusing
the
on outcomes, yeah.
work related outcomes, focus on
Mhm.
the outcomes. How do you support them in general as a leader?
Yeah, I think I think that's quite a bit of stuff in that question there, right? I think first is like, how do I deal with my own mental health, right? How do I keep
Sure.
myself sane with, like, there's a million teams, a million stuff going on. And I think a lot of it is just being able to say no to things. It's prioritization, right? Like, I mean, a lot of times I see this a lot, especially in new managers, like people that have just become engineering managers, right? You want to do everything because you're in a new role, you want to prove yourself, right? And I think a very key part of being successful is just being able to say no, right? When you can't do something, and eventually you prioritize what you say no to, right? And I think as long as you always have a clear path of what you're prioritizing, what you need to be doing, right? Even with your own life, right? Like if your life goals, right? If your plan is to, if there's stuff going on with your family and you need to prioritize that, and you need to say no to like a bunch of stuff going on at work, that's what you need to do, right? And even if what we're doing doesn't align with what your life needs, right? Maybe the company is not for you, right? Like to that extent, right? Like you have to learn how to say no. Like you have to you know prioritize what your team is working on together, so everybody's on the same page, right? But yeah, I think at the bottom line is, when things are coming up, right? If you say yes to everything, I think that's the path to, like, just being like super overloaded, and eventually you get negative feelings for everyone. So yeah, I think learning how to prioritize the time, just saying no to everything. Yeah, not no to everything, but just saying no,
Most of
right?
the
As much as
things.
you can. Yeah. I mean, you'll be
Okay.
surprised, right? You want to be saying no more often than not. Yeah.
Certainly. I just want to add before you move to the next question
Yeah.
answer about supporting the team. Like, so me as a recruiter, like what happens is there's so many people looking for jobs, right?
Mhm.
That historically, right? And there have been so many messages, requests, things like that happening. I mean, I want to help people, I want to support people, but then how many people I can support? I'm just a small, tiny tech recruiter in this huge city, right? So yeah, speaking about telling people no, speaking about prioritization, speaking about taking care of myself comes because I sometimes get burned out getting so much of like requests from people. So totally agree. Like prioritization is so important.
Yeah, prioritization. And I think like at the end of the day, if you're burnt out, you can't help anyone, so and from a business sense too, right? I can understand what you're saying, right? If you have like a million requests coming to you, but you know that these high impact ones are the ones you need to prioritize, right? You just have to be okay with saying no to all the low impact ones, and you can be nice about it and come back to them later. But yeah, it's not healthy to do everything at once.
Certainly. And how do you support your team members?
Yeah, I think by helping to prioritize things, for the most part, right? And just being really aware of like, I guess when somebody's doing too much, or I mean, there are always times in working for a startup where you have crunch time, right? You have to put in the extra effort, right? But I think as long as culturally, like that's not the norm of how you work. You like everybody's all hands on deck when it's time for all hands on deck, and when it's not time for all hands on deck, we try to get to that innovative mindset and try to do things that will help us in the future, right? And I think the only way that we can do that is make sure that your team is not working on everything at the same time, like because if everybody works on one thing, right, probably you can get a really good quality thing done, right? And we can celebrate it, we can be happy about it, we don't need to come back and like keep fixing things, so yeah, I think supporting my team is a lot of just making sure we align on outcomes, so yeah, at the end of the day, it just comes back to it's not how much work we're doing, but what we're actually producing, right? So
yeah, I think in that way, like if you have that kind of like a bigger picture rather than the micro goals or micromanaging people, then people are also very comfortable. I remember working in Japan as well, my manager, even here as well, like they're more focused on the broader picture rather than, okay, 1 or 2 days might go down, the person might feel sick or might have issues, but eventually that person hits his weekly, monthly, quarterly, annual goals. That's it, right? I mean, totally.
Yeah, and I think sometimes in engineering, and at least, right, like you always have the question of like what do you want to build, how do you want to build it, and when do you need to build it by, right? And you can't control all three, so if you need to build it at a certain time, then how you build it and what we're building changes, right? And if we really need a specific what we're building, then how we're building it and when we deliver it is different. So yeah, so I think it's just understanding that these three vectors exist, and you can't control all three of the vectors, so you do your best to control two of the vectors. When you talk to like business, right, like product that needs to be working on things, right, I think having like a bit more of an engineering driven organization, right, where we know our priorities, we know our long-term goals, right, and the organization understands itself enough to be able to prioritize properly, and I think that leads to a healthy team and healthy place to work. So yeah.
Totally agree. So prioritization and focusing on outcomes. Mike, thank you so much for your time today. It was really an amazing conversation. I personally learned a lot, and I believe our users, our listeners are also learning a lot. My last question would be one suggestion you give to us for future tech professionals.
Future tech professionals, I would say, just don't be afraid to get your hands dirty, if you're interested in something, and that's how I've kind of looked at my career. If I guess what you want to do in the future, right, shouldn't really be defined by what you're doing now. I think, for example, like right now you talk to a lot of people and people want to get into AI and like, this kind of fields, right? But, maybe they don't get to work on AI stuff at work, but, like you can do experimentation on your own, or, join AI hackathons, right? Just, I mean, there might be people that have been working for many years ahead of you, but I mean, yeah, lots of people in tech, I think, tend to have a bit of an imposter syndrome when it comes to things, so just do it, I guess, just for lack of a better catchphrase, just do it, get your hands dirty,
Just do
and, you're gonna find your community, find the thing that you like, all right, and, believe in yourself more. Yeah.
Totally. Thank you so much, Mike, for your time today. That's the conversation, and I hope our users really enjoys this conversation with Mike.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me, and it was an awesome chat. Hopefully I talk to you again.
Thank you.